Chapter 1. The man who didn't argue. David Parks had learned, over time, that silence unsettled people more than anger ever did. He discovered this at 31, standing in the narrow entryway of an apartment that still smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and reheated coffee, holding the handle of a rolling suitcase while his wife explained, casually, almost cheerfully, that she was leaving for a week-long beach trip with a man from her office. "Just a friend," she said, waving her phone in one hand as if the glowing screen validated the claim. "We've talked about this. You're being weird." David nodded once, slowly, the way he did when absorbing instructions at work. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He noticed, instead, the way she didn't meet his eyes, how her tone already carried the defensive sharpness of someone rehearsed in justification. "What's that look?" she asked, frowning. "You don't trust me?" David considered the question seriously. He always did. "I trust what I'm seeing," he said. She laughed, incredulous. "Unbelievable. You know what? If you don't like it, you can file for divorce. I'm not letting you control my life." That was the moment. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how easily they came out. How practiced. How relieved. David felt something settle into place, like a chair leg finally touching the floor. "Okay," he said. She blinked. "Okay. Yeah." He reached for the suitcase handle. "Your Uber's outside." The look on her face then, surprise followed quickly by something like disappointment, would stay with him far longer than the marriage itself. He carried her luggage downstairs, loaded it into the trunk, and stepped back. "Have fun," he said, meaning it in the literal sense, not the emotional one. She hesitated, clearly waiting for a last-minute argument. A grand speech, something she could later describe to friends as proof she'd tried. When none came, she kissed his cheek absently and got into the car. David watched the taillights disappear, then went back upstairs, washed a single mug, and went to bed. On Monday morning, he was at his lawyer's office with coffee in hand and a calm that startled even him. The prenup had been her idea. He remembered that clearly. Something about independence and modern marriages and not ending up like her parents. He'd read it carefully. She hadn't. The clause was simple, brutally so. Actions indicating the prioritization of another person's emotional, romantic, or practical welfare over that of one spouse constituted grounds for immediate divorce. No counseling required. No reconciliation period implied. A week-long beach vacation with another man, paired with a threat to divorce him for objecting, qualified. By the time she returned, sun-kissed and smiling, the paperwork had already been filed. She came through the door like nothing had happened, tossing her keys into the ceramic bowl, launching into a story about overpriced cocktails. David waited until she finished. Then he handed her the folder. Her smile faltered. "What's this?" "Your copy." She laughed. "Of what?" "Of the divorce filing." She opened the folder, closed it, opened it again. "You're not serious." "I am." Her voice rose. "You didn't even talk to me. You told me what to do if I didn't like it." "I didn't mean." She stopped, eyes darting. "We can talk about this." "We don't need to," she cried. She accused. She begged. She shifted tactics with impressive speed. When none of it worked, she grew angry. "You're really going to throw this away?" David met her gaze steadily. "You stopped being my wife when you told me another man mattered more." The court agreed. 5 years later, David lived alone in a modest townhouse with clean counters, a reliable car, and a life that ran on predictability and quiet competence. He was 33 now, divorced, financially stable, emotionally cautious. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a regional supply company. Unsexy, steady, oddly satisfying. He made enough money to never worry about rent and not enough to inspire envy. He liked it that way. Women didn't line up to talk to him. They did, however, frequently ask him to move heavy boxes. David obliged because he was helpful, not hopeful. Dating apps had been deleted years ago. He found them exhausting. The bios blurred together. Everyone loved travel. Everyone was strong and independent. Everyone expected dinner. He wasn't bitter. He was tired. Marriage, in his mind, wasn't a risk. It was a responsibility. And he hadn't met anyone he'd trust with that weight. Friday nights were for takeout, documentaries, and fixing things around the house that didn't strictly need fixing. It was peaceful. And peaceful, David had learned, could feel dangerously close to empty if you weren't paying attention. That thought came to him on an unremarkable Thursday evening, standing in line at a neighborhood bookstore cafe, holding a paperback he'd already read. "Hey!" He turned. The woman behind him smiled, not performatively, not politely, just openly. "You're holding that upside down," she said. David glanced at the book. She was right. "So I am," he said. "That explains the confusion." She laughed, quick and unguarded. "I was wondering how long you'd let that go. Honestly, I've committed harder to worse mistakes." She studied him for a second, eyes sharp but warm. "I like that answer. David." "Emma." They shook hands and David felt, unexpectedly, like something had just shifted an inch to the left. Not fireworks, not fate, just space. And for the first time in a long while, David didn't step away from it. Chapter 2, The Woman Who Notices Everything. David didn't usually linger in bookstores. He went in with purpose, found what he wanted, paid, and left before the quiet started to feel judgmental. This time, however, he found himself standing beside the cafe counter long after he'd received his coffee, pretending to read the back cover of the same paperback he already owned. Emma noticed. You know, she said, stirring oat milk into her drink, if you keep holding it like that, someone's going to assume you're trying to absorb it through osmosis. David glanced down. The book was upside down again. He sighed. This is why I avoid distractions. Am I the distraction? You are statistically significant. She smiled at that, leaning one elbow on the counter. Up close, David noticed details he normally missed. Freckles near her left eyebrow, a faint crease at the corner of her mouth that suggested she smiled often but not mindlessly. So, she said, do you always reread books you already own? Or am I witnessing a rare moment of existential confusion? I come here after work when my brain's fried, he said. I tell myself I'm browsing. Mostly I'm just avoiding going home immediately. Ah, the scenic route. Something like that. Emma took a sip, then tilted her head. You don't strike me as someone who avoids home because it's chaotic. David considered correcting her, then decided against it. It's quiet, he said. Sometimes that's worse. She nodded, as if he'd confirmed a theory rather than surprised her. Fair. There was a pause, not awkward but spacious. David was aware, suddenly, of how little he rushed to fill it. Emma broke it first. Do you mind if I sit? I promise not to psychoanalyze you too aggressively. Disappointing, he said. I was hoping for a full report. They claimed a small table near the window. Outside, traffic rolled past in different waves. I'm Emma, she said again, as if names could deepen through repetition. David. What do you do, David? Logistics, he replied. I make sure things end up where they're supposed to be. That sounds either very boring or secretly powerful. Both can be true. She laughed. I work in urban planning. I help design spaces people complain about later. That does sound powerful. Thank you. I wield zoning laws with reckless abandon. David smiled before he could stop himself. He noticed the ease of it and mentally filed it under things to be wary of. They talked about books, what they pretended to like versus what they actually reread. Emma admitted to loving terrible mystery novels with implausibly attractive detectives. David confessed to reading instruction manuals for appliances he didn't own. You're joking. I wish I were. Why? They're honest, he said. They don't promise more than they can deliver. Emma studied him again, this time longer. You've been disappointed by promises. There it was. The pivot. David felt the familiar tightening, the instinct to deflect, joke, retreat. Statistically, he said, most people have. She smiled faintly. True. But not everyone notices it the way you do. David looked out the window, buying himself a second. He wasn't used to being seen without effort. Can I ask you something? Emma said. You don't have to answer. That's usually a trap. I promise minimal emotional damage. He turned back to her. Go ahead. Why aren't you married? The question landed softly. No accusation. No expectation. I was, he said. Oh, divorced, he added. Because clarity mattered. She didn't recoil. Didn't apologize. Just nodded. That'll do it. He exhaled. It's been 5 years. And you're okay? I'm functional. That wasn't the question. David almost laughed. Almost. I'm content, he said finally. Mostly. Emma tapped her finger against her mug. Mostly is a dangerous word. So I've heard. They sat with that for a moment. David realized he wasn't scanning for exits. He wasn't rehearsing reasons this wouldn't work, even though his mind tried. So, Emma said lightly, are you seeing anyone? No. Dating apps. Deleted. By choice. Enthusiastically. She grinned. Same. It started to feel like shopping for humans. Exactly. Everyone's selling an optimized version of themselves. And returning the product feels rude. David chuckled. I'm glad it's not just me. Emma leaned back. I don't do clubs either, if that's a concern. It wasn't. It is now, she said, amused. They finished their drinks. The conversation meandered, work frustrations, favorite walking routes, the superiority of breakfast for dinner. David noticed how time slipped, how easy it felt. Eventually, Emma glanced at her watch. I should go. I promised my sister I'd help her move tonight. David stood with her. Heavy boxes? Always. He smiled. Of course. They walked toward the door together. At the threshold, Emma stopped. Would you like to get coffee again? She asked. Not here. Somewhere less introspective. David felt the familiar impulse to hesitate, to say maybe, to postpone. Instead, he said, yes. Her smile widened, unguarded. Great. Friday? Friday works. They exchanged numbers. Emma tucked her phone away, then hesitated. For what it's worth, she said. I don't think quiet is a flaw. David watched her leave, the bell above the door chiming softly behind her. He stood there longer than necessary, heart steady but alert. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating risk. He was curious. Chapter 3, Terms and Conditions. David arrived 10 minutes early and immediately regretted it. The cafe Emma had chosen was smaller than the bookstore one, brighter, and significantly more social. Exposed brick, communal tables, chalkboard menus written in a handwriting that suggested personality was a requirement for employment. David ordered a black coffee and claimed a two-top near the back, positioning himself so he could see the door without looking like he was guarding it. He wasn't nervous, he told himself. He was prepared. Preparation had served him well in life. Preparation was how you avoided surprises, and surprises, romantic or otherwise, had a habit of turning expensive. Emma walked in exactly on time. She wore dark jeans, a soft green sweater, and an expression that suggested she was already amused by something he hadn't done yet. Her hair was down this time, slightly tousled, like she hadn't argued with it too hard. She spotted him, smiled, and waved. David stood. Hi. Hi. She glanced at his untouched coffee. You're early. I like to establish a baseline. For what? In case things go terribly wrong. She laughed as she set her bag down. Comforting. They ordered pastries neither of them needed. Emma insisted on paying for hers without ceremony. David noticed and didn't comment. He filed it away. So, Emma said once they were seated, Friday coffee. This is officially a date, right? David felt the word land with surprising weight. Yes, he said. If that's acceptable. She raised an eyebrow. You ask permission for everything? No, he said. Only things that matter. That earned him a look, one that lingered just long enough to be intentional. Okay, she said. Then yes, date. They sipped their drinks. The cafe buzzed around them, but David found it easy to focus. Easier than it should have been. You seem. Emma searched for the word. Deliberate. That's a polite way of saying cautious. I was going to say intentional. Same difference. I disagree. David smiled faintly. Of course you do. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. Tell me something you usually don't tell people on first dates. David almost laughed. You're assuming I go on first dates. Humor me. He thought for a moment. There were many answers, some heavy, some trivial. He chose the one that felt most honest. I don't like ambiguity, he said. In people. Or situations. Emma nodded slowly. That tracks. It makes me bad at flirting, he added. I don't know, she said. You're doing okay. That's unintentional. Even better. She considered him, then said, My turn. I don't like performative independence. David blinked. Explain. I'm independent, she said. I pay my bills. I don't need rescuing. But I also don't treat relationships like a competition to see who needs who less. He felt something ease in his chest. That's refreshing. Good, she said. Because I'm not interested in proving anything. They talked about work again, deeper this time. Emma described zoning meetings that devolved into shouting matches over parking spaces. David shared the quiet satisfaction of solving logistical puzzles no one noticed unless they failed. You like being invisible, she observed. I like being effective. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, he agreed. But they often coexist. There was a pause. David felt it coming, the moment where he usually changed the subject. Where things edged too close to personal. This time, he didn't. I should probably tell you something, he said. Emma didn't interrupt. She waited. I don't date casually, he continued. Not because I'm intense, but because I don't see the point. If I'm spending time with someone, it's because I'm considering whether they fit into my life long term. Emma's expression didn't shift, but her attention sharpened. That's a lot of pressure for a second coffee. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just don't want to misrepresent my intentions. She studied him. Most people would save that speech for month 3. Most people like plausible deniability. She smiled. And you don't. No. Emma leaned back, crossing her arms. Not defensively, but thoughtfully. Okay, my turn to be clear. David waited. I'm not in a hurry, she said. I'm not looking for someone to complete me, but I am looking for something real. And I don't confuse real with dramatic. He felt the words settle, aligning with something he hadn't realized was out of place. Good, he said. That's it? She asked. No interrogation? I believe you. She laughed softly. You do? Yes. Why? Because you didn't try to sell it. Emma tilted her head. You're an interesting man, David Parks. So I've been told. By whom? Mostly people trying to figure out what to do with me. They finished their coffee. The pastries disappeared piece by piece, unnoticed. When they stood to leave, Emma hesitated near the door. Walk with me. Where to? Nowhere important. He nodded. Okay. They strolled down the street, the late afternoon sun slanting between buildings. Conversation flowed easily. Childhood stories, favorite cities, things they'd stopped pretending to enjoy. Emma stopped at a corner and turned to him. Can I ask you something else? You're 2 for 2 so far. What scares you about relationships now? David didn't answer immediately. He watched a couple cross the street, arguing quietly, hands still linked. Losing myself, he said. Or worse, ignoring myself. Emma nodded. That's fair. She met his eyes. For what it's worth, I don't think you're someone who disappears easily. He held her gaze, surprised by how much that meant. Thank you, he said. They stood there a moment longer than necessary. I had a good time, she said. So did I. She smiled. Let's do this again. Yes, he said, without hesitation. As they parted ways, David walked home with an unfamiliar sensation. Something like optimism, tempered by caution, but present all the same. He wasn't rewriting his rules, but he was beginning to consider revisions. Chapter 4, The Prenup Conversation. David chose the restaurant carefully. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't cheap. It was quiet enough to hear yourself think and busy enough that no one paid attention to anyone else's conversation. The kind of place where people went to eat, not to be seen eating. Emma noticed immediately. This feels intentional, she said as they were seated. Should I be bracing myself? Only emotionally, David replied. No pop quizzes. She smiled, but he could tell she was alert now. Emma noticed everything. They ordered pasta for her, grilled chicken for him, a bottle of wine neither of them rushed into. The waiter left them alone, and for a moment they talked about neutral things. A strange art installation downtown, a mutual dislike of overly loud restaurants, the mystery of why menus insisted on using the word aioli. David waited. He didn't want to ambush her with his past, but he also refused to treat it like a shameful secret revealed only after emotional investment made retreat awkward. That kind of delay felt dishonest. Emma, he said, setting his fork down. I want to tell you something, and I don't want it to sound heavier than it is. She met his eyes. Okay. I told you I was divorced, he continued. I didn't tell you how. She didn't interrupt. That mattered more than she knew. My marriage ended quickly, he said. 2 years. It ended because my ex-wife decided that the boundaries we agreed on didn't apply when they became inconvenient. Emma's brow furrowed slightly, not in judgment, but focus. She went on a week-long vacation with a coworker, David said. Told me if I didn't like it, I could file for divorce. Emma inhaled sharply. Wow. I did, he said simply. She waited for more, and he gave it to her. Not dramatically, not bitterly. He explained the prenup, the clause, the lack of argument, the paperwork filed before the plane landed. I didn't fight, he said. I didn't yell. I didn't try to convince her to stay. I just accepted the information she gave me. Emma leaned back in her chair, eyes never leaving his face. How did she react? At first, shock, then denial, then anger. He shrugged lightly. Eventually, inconvenience. And you? I slept better once it was over. That surprised her. He could tell. You don't sound angry, she said. I was, he replied, for a while. But anger required ongoing engagement. I didn't see the return on investment. Emma let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. You talk about emotions like they're line items. I talk about decisions like they're final. The wine arrived. David poured for both of them, hands steady. The prenup scares people when I mention it, he said. Not because of the money, but because of the clause. People hear it and think I'm controlling. Emma swirled her glass. What do you think it was? A statement of values, David said. It said fidelity wasn't just physical. It said prioritization mattered. It said marriage meant choosing each other even when it wasn't exciting. Emma took a sip, considered. And you'd want that again? She asked. David nodded. Yes, or I wouldn't bother. There it was. The point where many conversations had shifted before, where discomfort crept in, where people smiled politely and recalibrated him into something rigid or extreme. Emma didn't do that. Instead, she asked, did she ever apologize? David thought for a moment. For losing the marriage, yes. For the choice itself, no. Emma shook her head. That tells you everything. He watched her closely now. Does it bother you? She met his gaze without hesitation. No. He blinked. No, I don't want to be with someone who's afraid to have standards, she said. And I don't want to be with someone who confuses access with entitlement. Something in his chest loosened. You're not worried I'd leave at the first misstep? He asked. She smiled faintly. Only if the misstep involves a beach, a man, and an ultimatum. He laughed genuinely this time. Surprised them both. I'm serious, she added. Boundaries don't scare me. Unspoken expectations do. David exhaled slowly. You have no idea how rare that is. I do, Emma said. That's why I'm still here. They ate, conversation easing again. The heaviness diffused but not dismissed. Emma asked questions, not probing but curious. David answered without defensiveness. For the first time, the story didn't feel like a warning label. At the end of the meal, Emma reached for the check. I've got it, David said automatically. She raised an eyebrow. We didn't discuss that. He paused, then nodded. Fair point. She smiled. Next time you can. Next time, he repeated, testing the phrase. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk. For a moment, neither of them moved. I'm glad you told me, Emma said. So am I, David replied. She hesitated, then reached out, brushing her fingers against his. Not grabbing, not claiming. Just contact. David, she said. You're not broken. I know, he said quietly. But thank you. She smiled, warm and steady. Good, because I don't date projects. They stood there, hands touching, the city moving around them. For the first time since his divorce, David felt something unfamiliar and welcome. Not fear, not certainty, but willingness. Chapter 5, the past reappears, briefly, ineffectively. David didn't expect to see his ex-wife in the produce aisle. That was the thing about closure. It lulled you into believing the story was finished, when really it was just filed away, waiting for an inconvenient moment to resurface. He was comparing avocados, performing the gentle squeeze test with professional seriousness, when he heard his name spoken with a familiarity that no longer belonged to anyone. David. He looked up. She stood a few feet away, cart half full, hair different but face unmistakably the same. There was a pause, just long enough for recognition to settle into surprise, then calculation. Hi, he said. She smiled, tentative at first, then warmer. Wow, it's been, 5 years? About that. You look good. So do you. It was true in the factual sense. She was put together, confident, wearing the kind of ease that came from believing she was still the protagonist of every room she entered. They exchanged pleasantries the way strangers did, which struck David as faintly amusing given the shared history. So, she said, gesturing vaguely, are you seeing anyone? David didn't hesitate. Yes. Her eyebrows lifted. Oh. He watched the reaction ripple. Surprise first, then curiosity, then something tighter. That's nice, she said. Serious. Promising, he replied. She nodded slowly. Good for you. There it was. The moment where the conversation could tilt, where nostalgia or regret might sneak in. David picked an avocado and placed it in his basket. Well, he said, it was good seeing you. Take care. He walked away without waiting for a response. Heart steady, pulse unchanged. Later that evening, he told Emma about it. They were on his couch, shoes kicked off, a shared container of takeout balanced between them. The TV played something neither of them was watching. She asked if I was seeing anyone, he said. And you said yes, Emma guessed. Yes, Emma smiled. Good answer. She didn't seem thrilled. That's not your responsibility. I know. Emma studied him for a moment. How did it feel? David considered. Unremarkable. She laughed softly. That's the goal, isn't it? He nodded. I think so. Emma leaned against him, comfortable, unguarded. David rested his arm along the back of the couch, not pulling her closer, just there. Thank you for telling me, she said. I didn't want it to feel like a surprise later. She tilted her head to look at him. You're very intentional about that. I've learned surprises are rarely gifts. She smiled. Sometimes they are. Sometimes, he agreed. They sat in easy silence, the city humming outside the windows. David felt a quiet certainty settle, not about the future, but about the present. The past had knocked. He hadn't answered. Chapter 6, Risk Assessment. David didn't realize he was coasting until Emma pointed it out. Gently, without accusation. The way someone might mention a stain you hadn't noticed yet. They were walking through a park on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that felt curated for ease. Families sprawled on blankets. Dogs chased tennis balls with joyful incompetence. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cut grass. David liked days like this. Predictable, pleasant, contained. Emma, however, kept glancing at him like she was reading footnotes he hadn't written. You're very good at this, she said. At walking, at being present without being vulnerable. He stopped. That alone told him she'd hit something important. Is that a complaint? He asked. She turned to face him fully. No, it's an observation. David slipped his hands into his jacket pockets, buying himself a second. You say that like there's a difference. There is, Emma said. A complaint asks you to change. An observation asks you to notice. He nodded slowly. Okay, I'm noticing. They resumed walking, slower now. I like you, Emma said. You're thoughtful. You're honest. You don't play games. He waited. But, she continued, you also keep everything optimized. David smiled faintly. I work in logistics. I know, she said. But this, she gestured between them, isn't a supply chain. No, he agreed. It's not. They reached a bench overlooking the pond and sat. A pair of ducks argued nearby with great intensity. I don't want to push you, Emma said. I just want to understand how much of this is caution, and how much is fear. David watched the water ripple. He didn't feel defensive. That was new. After my divorce, he said, I made a decision. I would never again be in a position where someone else's choices could dismantle my life. Emma nodded. That makes sense. So I built a life that doesn't require risk, he continued. It's stable. It's comfortable. It's sufficient. And, she prompted. And sometimes, he admitted, it feels like I'm protecting something that isn't actually under threat anymore. She smiled softly. That's very self-aware. Years of practice. Emma leaned back against the bench. I don't need you to promise me anything, David. I know. I don't need guarantees. I know that too. She looked at him. But I do need to know that you're choosing this, not just allowing it. The words landed carefully, like someone placing a glass object on a table. David exhaled. I am choosing it. She searched his face. Are you? He thought about it. About how easy it would be to keep things exactly as they were. About how safe it felt to stay just slightly detached. I think, he said slowly, I've been choosing not to lose. That's not the same thing. Emma's smile was small but genuine. No, it's not. They sat in silence for a while. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just honest. Later that evening, after they parted ways, David found himself restless. He cleaned his already clean kitchen. Reorganized a drawer that hadn't caused him problems in years. He stood in the doorway of his bedroom, feeling like something was missing and realizing, uncomfortably, that it wasn't peace. He thought about Emma. About how she didn't rush him, didn't test him, didn't demand reassurance. How she simply showed up and expected him to do the same. It was infuriatingly reasonable. On Tuesday, he asked her to dinner at his place. When she arrived, she took in the tidy living room, the deliberate absence of clutter, the careful neutrality of the decor. You live like someone who could leave at a moment's notice, she said. He winced. Is that bad? It's not bad, she said. It's informative. Dinner was simple, nothing performative. They talked, laughed, shared a bottle of wine. At some point, Emma set her glass down and looked at him. Can I stay? She asked. The question wasn't loaded. No expectation beyond the asking. David felt the old reflex, the mental checklist, the contingency planning. He pushed it aside. Yes, he said. They didn't rush. They didn't make declarations. They moved with the kind of attentiveness that came from respect rather than urgency. Later, lying beside her in the quiet, David stared at the ceiling, heart steady but awake. Emma traced a slow line along his arm. You okay? Yes, he said. Then, after a beat, better than okay. She smiled against his shoulder. Good. In the dark, David made a small, private decision. He wouldn't confuse safety with stagnation anymore. He didn't need certainty. He needed courage. Chapter 7, Choosing In, the misunderstanding arrived quietly, which was how David knew it mattered. It didn't come with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived as a change in tone, subtle enough that he almost missed it, familiar enough that his body recognized it before his mind did. It started on a Wednesday. Emma texted him just after lunch. Running late tonight. Can we reschedule dinner? David stared at the message longer than necessary. There was nothing wrong with it. No explanation owed. No red flags embedded between the words. Of course, he typed back. Everything okay. A pause. Work thing. I'll explain later. Later was vague. Vague had teeth. By the time evening rolled around, David had reorganized his desk twice and eaten leftovers he hadn't been hungry for. He told himself he was being ridiculous. Emma had a demanding job. He respected that. He wasn't entitled to every detail of her schedule. Still, his mind did what it always did when given open space. It assessed. He replayed the last few weeks. Nothing felt off. No sudden distance. No guardedness. If anything, Emma had been consistent, present without being possessive, affectionate without pressure. Which was precisely why the uncertainty got under his skin. At 9, his phone buzzed. I'm sorry. Long day. Can we talk tomorrow? David hesitated, thumb hovering. Sure, he replied. Sleep well. He meant it. That night, he didn't sleep much. By morning, he talked himself through every rational explanation, and then dismantled each one with practiced efficiency. It wasn't suspicion that bothered him. It was the old instinct stirring, the one that told him to step back before he stepped in too far. On Thursday afternoon, Emma showed up at his place unannounced. David opened the door to find her standing there, hair pulled back, eyes tired but steady. Hi, she said. I hope this is okay. It is, he replied, stepping aside. Come in. She set her bag down and took a breath, like someone bracing for impact. I owe you an explanation, she said. David nodded. I'm listening. She looked at him, really looked, as if gauging how much truth he could hold. My department got pulled into an emergency review, she said. A redevelopment project from years ago is under scrutiny. I was the junior planner on it. That sounds stressful. It is. But that's not the whole reason I canceled. David waited. One of the people involved is my ex, she said. There it was. Not betrayal. Not secrecy. Just history, resurfacing inconveniently. I didn't want to spring that on you over text, Emma continued. And I didn't want to make it sound like something it wasn't. David absorbed the information slowly. He noticed the familiar tightening in his chest. Not panic, not anger, but vigilance. How involved are you with him? He asked. Professionally, she said. Only professionally. We broke up years ago. No unresolved feelings. No blurred lines. She paused. But I know your history, and I didn't want you filling in blanks I hadn't addressed. David appreciated that more than he expected. Thank you for telling me, he said. You're not upset? I'm processing. That's fair. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them noticeable but not hostile. I want to be clear, Emma said. If this situation made you uncomfortable, I would understand. I'm not asking you to ignore your boundaries. David studied her face. No defensiveness. No minimization. What I'm reacting to, he said carefully, isn't you working with an ex. It's the part of me that associates surprise with danger. Emma nodded. I figured. I don't think you did anything wrong, he added. She exhaled, shoulders easing. That's a relief. But, he continued, I also realized something. She waited. In the past, this would have been my cue to retreat. Not because of what you did, but because of what might happen. Emma's voice was gentle. And now, he said, I don't want to make decisions based on ghosts. She smiled softly. Good. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension dissipating. I'm not asking you to trust blindly, Emma said. I'm asking you to trust deliberately. David considered that. I can do deliberate. She laughed quietly. I know. He shifted closer to her. Not dramatically. Just enough. Next time, he said. You don't have to protect me from information. I wasn't protecting you, she replied. I was protecting us. He nodded. I see that now. Emma reached for his hand. He let her. I don't want to lose momentum because of fear, she said. Neither do I. They leaned into each other then, foreheads touching. Not as a reconciliation but as a confirmation. Later, after she left, David stood alone in his living room, reflecting on the moment he'd chosen not to pull away. It hadn't been easy, but it had been right. He realized something important as he turned off the lights. Trust wasn't the absence of risk. Chapter 8. Reasonable expectations. David had always believed that endings were supposed to feel decisive. Clean lines, clear outcomes, a sense of finality that let you close the file and move on. What surprised him, standing in his kitchen on a quiet Saturday morning, while Emma leaned against the counter sipping coffee, was how unceremonious happiness felt. No fanfare, no certainty, just ease. You're thinking very loudly, Emma said. I don't think loudly. You do when you're overanalyzing, she replied. Your jaw tightens. It's subtle, but it's there. David exhaled. That's unsettling. You'll get used to it. They'd fallen into a rhythm over the past few weeks. Dinners that turned into long conversations, errands that became dates by accident, mornings like this that felt domestic without being presumptive. David liked it, which of course made him cautious. Emma set her mug down. Okay, out with it. He leaned back against the counter opposite her. I'm trying to figure out when I crossed the line from being careful to being passive. She tilted her head. Do you think you have? I think, he said slowly, that I've been letting things happen instead of choosing them, and that's starting to feel like avoidance with better branding. Emma smiled. That might be the most you sentence you've ever said. I'm serious. I know. She stepped closer, resting her hip against the counter near him. What does choosing look like to you? David considered. Acknowledging risk, accepting that there are no guarantees, still stepping forward. Sounds exhausting, she said lightly. It is. And you still want to do it? Yes. That answer came without hesitation, and the ease of it startled him. Emma studied his face. David, she said gently, I'm not waiting for you to promise me forever. I know. I'm not waiting for you to stop being cautious. I wouldn't know how. She smiled. Good. I like that about you. He met her gaze. Then what are you waiting for? For you to say what you want, she replied. Not what you're willing to tolerate. The distinction landed. David straightened, grounding himself. I want a partnership, he said. One where we choose each other deliberately, where expectations are spoken, where we don't weaponize independence or mistake attention for value. Emma's smile softened. That sounds reasonable. I want trust, he continued. Not blind trust, informed trust, the kind that survives inconvenience. I can do that. I want to keep my life, he added, and make space for yours, not merge them so completely that we forget who we are. Emma nodded. That's healthy. And, he said, allowing a small smile, I want to laugh more than I argue. She laughed. That's a low bar. You'd be surprised. They stood there, the weight of the moment balanced by its simplicity. Emma reached for his hand. Then here's what I want. He listened. I want to keep choosing you, she said. Not because it's safe, but because it's good. I want room to grow without being told I'm drifting. I want honesty without punishment. David squeezed her hand gently. I can offer that. I don't need a ring, she added. I don't need a timeline. I appreciate that. But I do need presence, she said. Not perfect, just present. David nodded. That I can promise. Emma smiled. Careful. You said promise. He smiled back. I meant it. They didn't seal the moment with grand gestures. No declarations shouted into the void. Just a quiet agreement, understood and mutual. Later that evening, they hosted friends for dinner, Emma's sister, a couple from David's work, the apartment filled with laughter and overlapping conversations. David found himself moving easily through the space, refilling glasses, listening more than speaking. At one point, Emma's sister cornered him near the sink. You seem different, she said. David raised an eyebrow. That's ominous. In a good way, she clarified. Emma's lighter. She laughs more. David glanced across the room at Emma, mid-story, animated and warm. She does that. Her sister smiled knowingly. Don't mess it up, he chuckled. I don't plan to. Later, after everyone left and the dishes were stacked to dry, Emma leaned against him, content. You know, she said, this feels like the opposite of a rom-com ending. How so? No big conflict, no dramatic confession. Just two people deciding to be intentional. David kissed the top of her head. I think that's better. So do I. They sat on the couch, the city quiet outside, the future undefined but no longer intimidating. David thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, standing in an entryway holding a suitcase, choosing dignity over chaos. He hadn't known then that he wasn't closing himself off. He'd been clearing space. Emma shifted beside him, tucking her feet under his leg. What are you thinking about now? That I'm glad I didn't confuse peace with happiness forever. She smiled. They're related, just not identical. He nodded. I'm learning that. David Parks didn't believe in perfect endings, but he believed in reasonable expectations. And for the first time in a long while, he was willing to build something on them, one deliberate choice at a time.